The queen gets repositioned slightly to take advantage of light squares, but basically g4 is just a step on the path to h5. Now Benko pushes his pawn one square, which covers the d5 square so that a knight cannot get there and cause some trouble. However, he probably should have moved the pawn 2 squares, because then it has the threat of coming to c4 and driving the bishop away, also undermining the support of the pawn at e4. This would have given him more possibilities later. Instead, after c6, queen h5, he's in a little bit of difficulty. It seems strange, but really at this point he probably should have pushed the pawn from c6 to c5, even though it's a complete waste of a move. The idea of wasting a move is very important in the opening or the end game, but in the middle game it's okay to admit that you're wrong. It's okay to, as they say, flip-flop. If you thought the pawn belonged at c6 and then you realize that it would be better at c5, if it happens to take you an extra move to get there, well, so be it. But naturally, most players are reluctant to admit they're wrong, and to avoid that kind of admission, they'll play something else. And in this case, Benko just decided to protect the pawn at e5. And also, Benko felt that he had a way of solving the problems of defense. Benko sees that by moving the pawn from f5, an exchange of queens will be offered. And once the queens are off the board, this particular endgame is not so bad. Black still has a strong bishop at g7, and it's not going to be easy for white to make progress. Well, that knight at d4 is very, very strong. And even though it costs him a bishop, Bobby gets rid of it. Now the knight on c3 is attacked, and once it moves away, the pawn at e4 will fall, and things look as though they're going Benko's way. But this is where Bobby unleashes one of his greatest moves ever. It's not an easy move to see. Remember that candidate moves are best listed first those that involve captures and checks, and then those that create big threats, and only down below do you have sort of the little improvement moves. That is, how can you improve something or prevent your opponent from doing something? Here, Fischer is well aware that if that pawn gets from f7 to f5, queens come off, it's not going to be easy to win the game. So he came up with a fantastic move, the ultimate blocking tactic. The rook moves to f6. Well, that's one way to make sure that the pawn at f7 doesn't move. The rook is sacrificed just to prevent the f-pawn from moving. Now, the king returns to g8. Well, why didn't he take the rook? Let's take a look. Suppose bishop takes. The pawn goes to e5. Now notice that the queen is threatening checkmate at h7. And there's really nothing much that can be done about it. Toss the knight in the way. There it goes. Toss the pawn up. But sooner or later, that's checkmate. That wasn't very hard for Benko to calculate, so he moves the king to g8. But now, the pawn goes to e5 anyway. And Benko plays h6. This is a final desperate attempt. He's hoping for a miracle here. Because if white actually takes the knight with the rook, for example, let's see what would happen. Then Benko has a very surprising counterplay. The pawn at e5 falls. Now it's true that there has been a sacrifice here and an exchange of queens is offered, but even after the queens are exchanged, the rook is still attacked. and so is the knight at c3. So, if, for example, the rook goes and captures the pawn, then the knight is captured, and now material is even, and the endgame is likely to wind up a draw. The rook and the bishop can't combine forces to checkmate the black king. So Benko's got this all set up, but Bobby just retreated the knight to e2, and Benko resigned, because there's no way to effectively save the knight at d6. The threat is simply white's queen goes to f5. For example, let's say the knight moves to c8, queen to f5, and now the checkmate at h7 is inevitable. So Fischer won this game. He did complete the 11-0 sweep, and along the way he demonstrated a good method for playing against the Pirc and modern defense, and also showed off what remains the most brilliant use of a blocking tactic in all of chess history.